Hey, welcome back to the Unbelievable Podcast. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald, and today we are recapping the 2020 NFL Draft from a Minnesota Vikings perspective, just like you thought we were going to be, because that's what everyone else is doing in the world right now. So, Drew and I are going to spend the next 45 minutes or so going through each of the 15 picks of the Vikings. We'll spend, obviously, a little bit more time on the bigger names up at the top of the board. And we'll give you some analysis from what we know, talk about where these players are going to fit within the Vikings' current roster, how that's going to change, and I think that we'll end up bleeding into talking about the division rivals as well and the drafts that the other teams in the NFC North put together, just because that should be fun. I'm excited to do that. So that is the general outline as usual. We have no idea where this is going to go, but that's the plan for today. So without further ado, let's go through this draft. Historic draft, by the way, by Rick Spielman. First time since I think they said 1974 when the draft changed to 7 rounds that 15 players have been selected by one organization. So there's a little fun fact for you and trivia night a couple of years from now. Overall, I mean, it's a pretty extensive draft. Obviously, when you take 15 players, you're going to get a lot of different positions. You're going to fill out a lot of different needs on paper. But there's also some quality here and some good timing as well. So just to run through real quick, starting from the top, I'm going to try to do this in one breath. The Vikings started with Justin Jefferson, wide receiver from LSU, cornerback Jeff Gladney from TCU, offensive tackle Ezra Cleveland from Boise State, cornerback Cameron Dantzler from Mississippi State, defensive end DJ Wanham, South Carolina, defensive tackle James Lynch, Baylor, linebacker Troy Dye, Oregon, cornerback Harrison Hand, Temple, wide receiver KJ Osborne, Miami, offensive tackle Blake Brandel, Oregon State, safety Josh Metellus, Michigan, defensive end Kenny Willekes from Michigan State, quarterback Nate Stanley, Iowa, safety Brian Cole, Mississippi State, offensive lineman Kyle Hinton, Washburn. Okay, there's 2 breaths for 15 players right there, and that's what the Vikings did over the weekend if you were not paying attention. So let's start off here with the first 2 picks here in the first round. Obviously, Mr. Spielman had a night for the ages on Thursday. The first selection being Justin Jefferson out of LSU. Tell me about the wide receiver.
Well, yeah, so I think, first of all, the first round was very entertaining, especially after the first half or so. Because,
for sure,
there wasn't any trades in the first, 12 picks. Then, I think you had the Bucs move up a spot for a tackle. And then, so the wild part for this pick in particular was that the Eagles were on the clock, and then they showed Justin Jefferson on the phone.
Yeah. Right.
Celebrating, and the family was celebrating with him, and we kind of thought, oh, great, he's going to be an Eagle, and Vikings are going to get sniped right in front of him.
Again,
Jefferson's
by
going
the
to
way.
go. Turns out they picked Jalen Reagor, TCU, who goes a little bit higher than maybe many would expect, and then Jefferson falls to the Vikings, and they snatch him up faster than I think it was faster than any team made a pick, or what it sounds like. So. I love the pick. I've said all along receiver is the biggest weakness in this roster right now, or at least was prior to the draft. Filling that need that Diggs has left. Obviously, Jefferson's not going to do it by himself.
Right.
You're not going to reach Stephon Diggs' performance level, maybe ever, but certainly not right away. So you need another weapon out there, someone that can separate on the outside or in the slot like he can, and. He was when he's got a quarterback that can throw the ball like Joe Burrow in college, he can light it up. So great pick, and I think it sounds like he was pretty high on their board anyway. And the fact that he fell was just even better. They didn't have to trade up for him. So I'm all for that pick.
Absolutely, it sounded like the Vikings certainly ran to upped their internet speed to submit that draft select. I don't know. They submitted that draft selection very quickly with Justin Jefferson because it was widely known. There was no smokescreen, shockingly enough, that the Vikings wanted Justin Jefferson. They thought that he fits the scheme well. I certainly agree. The traits that he displayed at LSU, while I will go back to what Drew just said, playing with Joe Burrow probably inflated the statistical numbers. When you're playing with the best quarterback in the country, a guy that was pro ready, at least by the back end of last season, you're going to get some numbers that are a little bit kind of ridiculous. 111 receptions, 1540 for yards, and 18 touchdowns for Justin Jefferson last year. I mean, that's crazy numbers even from an SEC college standpoint. So, you're getting a hell of a player, and this is something we talked about when we were doing our mock drafts simulations as well. You're getting a very refined player as well. Very talented route runner, can run a full route tree. The biggest question mark, and I think I've seen this from a couple of places, but this is something that not just myself, one of my buddy who was a former cornerback, he pointed out as well. The thing that I'm worried about most with Justin Jefferson is his separating ability. Can he get off press coverage? Because that's
press coverage thing, yeah.
He was inconsistent with that in college, and he was able to get away with it because of the way defensive backs had to cover LSU's offense, because they could spread it out and go wide with Jamar Chase as well and Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the backfield. So he enters a similar situation where he's going to have Adam Thielen taking coverage off him. He's going to get the number 2 cornerback right off the bat if he is in the starting lineup week 1. We know how Mike Zimmer is with starting his rookie wide receivers for some reason. But this looks like a player who's an immediate impact. I like him a lot. I mean, he straight up, like I know this isn't helpful analysis, but he looks cool as hell in purple and gold. So and he's wearing 18. That's that's my favorite player, Sidney Rice's number. So
Randy Moss's rookie number preseason.
Absolutely. So I'm very excited about this selection. This was the selection that I called. I thought this was the most fitting selection for the Vikings. I will admit that when I started to see Jerry Jeudy and CeeDee Lamb slide down the board a little bit,
I wanted to trade up too.
I wanted to trade up. Right. But to stay at 22 and to take this player and add him to your offense after Stephon Diggs leaves was about as perfect of kind of like the best possible thing you could do for this team's future, I think.
Yeah, well, and then you get to the next pick. And so I know you for sure kind of said your best case scenario was Jefferson and Jeff Gladney in the first round. Vikings get to 25 and they trade down.
Even better Gladney, than my best case scenario, honestly.
Right, which is even better. That's what I was going to get to, is that there, you had Gladney and Jalen Johnson and a few other corners on the board. First of all, shocking that A.J. Terrell went off the board at 16, and then Arnett went off at 19, which was wild, leaving Gladney and Jalen Johnson, some of these other guys, on the board. And Rick's able to wheel a 4th-round pick, I believe, out of San Francisco to move down 6 spots and still get the guy he wanted, who, since the draft and even leading up to the draft, so much talk about how he's a perfect Zimmer corner in terms of the feistiness, the toughness, the competitiveness. Still a little bit smaller, but he has that attitude and that drive, and it sounds like he was pushed really hard at TCU. So it seems like a really good fit, and he's going to have to be pressed into action right away, just based on the depth, the lack of depth at the position.
He absolutely will be. Like, this is, if you're going to call your shot on which rookie is going to have the greatest impact, positive or negative, on this Vikings team, Jeff Gladney is your pick, straight up. There's no way he is not in the starting lineup week 1 unless he's hurt, straight up, or he starts smoking weed or does something to piss Mike Zimmer off. On sheer potential alone, on his ability, on his NFL readiness, on how well he fits into this scheme, all of those factors, he's a perfect selection for the Minnesota Vikings. The one gripe that I have is that he's a little bit small, and I think that they ended up just taking the guy who's going to be their slot corner for the foreseeable future in the first round, which isn't a bad thing. It's just non-traditional, right? If you think about the way that slot corners have been selected over the last 10, 15 years, these are generally guys who have been 3rd, 4th, 5th round picks because they're somewhere between 5'8" and 5'11", as opposed to 6 feet and 6'2". It doesn't mean he's any less talented. It just means that in the past, the nickel corner spot has been kind of undervalued. And as we've seen the NFL transition into even more of a passing league, going from being 60-40 to maybe 65-35 or 70-30 for some teams, you need to have that slot corner that can, line up with Larry Fitzgerald, a guy who's 6'2" or 3" or whatever Larry Fitzgerald is. I should know that. You need to have that guy on your roster, and he's worthy of a first-round selection. So he's NFL ready. He fits into a spot of need, and you got him at a value because you were able to trade down to get him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a perfect pick, right? Like, you can't do much better than
The
that.
one thing I was the one reason I personally prefer Jalen Johnson after looking through everything was just simply age, right? Because Gladney I think is 23 or 24 already. Jalen Johnson is like 21 or will be 21 during the season. So that was the only thing that was, it seems like the Vikings like to draft young and get those guys developed and then scoot them into their prime sort of in that second contract.
It's an interesting factor, sure.
But again, Gladney is, I think he can also work on the outside and did a bunch in college, and he just has a skill set and the size maybe to work inside too as a jam slot guy. But famously shut down Denzel Mims completely. So
and Jamar Chase too, as well.
And Jamar Chase, yeah. So it's a pretty solid pick right there. That's a pretty solid combo to address the two biggest needs probably on the roster there. With Jefferson and Gladney, that's a pretty solid hit there for Spielman, it seems like.
For sure. And just on the flip side of that, if you are trying to look for kind of a positive from the fact that he is a little bit older, the fact that he did play 4 full seasons in college, and he was also a redshirt freshman as well, this is more important for quarterbacks, I believe, but I think it also applies to cornerback, which is a position where as you become more experienced with tendencies, you tend to get better. I remember one of the highlights they talked about with Jeff Gladney is that he's not a grabber. He doesn't get a lot of pass interference penalties. That's the type of thing that's a product of experience. So, yes, he's a little bit older, and that's certainly a knock, especially for the fact that, he's going to be, 28 or 29? 29 after his first contract? I mean, that kind of sucks, but straight up. But at the same time, you're getting a guy who knows what he's doing immediately, and assuming he can adapt to this playbook, which, I have full confidence that he can, he's going to be a hell of a player right away. At the very least, he's going to be an impact player in a way that, I'm trying to think of like Josh Robinson was not. I know that's not super helpful, but like Josh Robinson was a relatively early round pick. He was inexperienced, and he came in and he shit the bed. This is not what I expect from Jeff Gladney. He's a smarter player, more experienced, well-rounded skill set. If he was 2 inches taller, he's a top 10 pick, I think. So that's a situation that the Vikings did in the first round. I feel, you have to feel very, very good about those 2 picks because you get value, you address needs, and you address needs with players who are ready to contribute immediately, which is what this team wants. So, Vikings get out of the first round. If you're curious, I did look up some draft grades here. This is coming from CBS. CBS gave an A for the Justin Jefferson pick and Jeff Gladney a B. I personally think they're both A's. This is the best that you could hope for when you're drafting at 22 and 25, and ultimately when you're drafting at 22 and 31.
Good for you for giving them both an A for the picks that you suggested that they make anyway in your dream scenario. Shout out to you for giving them an A.
That's a fair point.
Now, in the second round, this is where people may disagree or agree, whatever. But I think one thing to keep in mind with Ezra Cleveland in the second round, we don't know what the Vikings' status was with Trent Williams during this time, right? Because it seemed like there was, the possibility of it, and then there was the rumors that I didn't want to play for the Vikings, and then it sounded like he denied that, and we don't know how close that was to happening. If it was close, if it wasn't, if the Vikings thought they were going to get him and then suddenly didn't, I don't know. But in terms of the Cleveland pick, I was personally looking for Josh Jones out of Houston at the time. The fact that he fell to the third round actually was a bit surprising to me, but it seems like they clearly have that sort of template for a tackle.
Right.
They found with Brian O'Neill, and they wanted to replicate that the best they could, and Ezra Cleveland seems to be that guy for the long haul. A little bit slimmer maybe out of college like O'Neill was, but athletic and can move around. So will be a fit for that zone scheme if he can put on a few pounds like O'Neill did and become that stud. So I'm coming around to the pick for sure. It's not my ideal choice, but I'm not going to fault Spielman too much for looking at Brian O'Neill, seeing how he's progressed and saying, okay, I want that again on the other side of the line.
This to me was probably the most, other than Justin Jefferson at 22, this was the most predictable pick that the Vikings made, I think. Because every report around the NFL draft concerning the Vikings almost always seem to lead back to Ezra Cleveland.
Yeah.
And
well, there was rumors that'd be the first round pick.
Right.
Was Ezra Cleveland
at 25, right?
Yeah.
And it's I would have been accepting of him at 25, but I am over the moon at 58? Yeah, 58. So to kind of, I guess I like to start with objective numbers, and it's a little more difficult with offensive linemen. But Nick Olson tweeted today a comparison between Brian O'Neill, Garrett Bradbury, and Ezra Cleveland, and he used relative athlete scores, which is Kent Lee Platty's system, which is he's been developed. By the way, I remember working with Kent. What was it? At the bar room.
Yeah, 5 years ago.
5 years ago. Okay, this is like his system includes so much information, and it compiles it down into a number 1 to 10. Okay, and that's how you get RAS, which is his system, and it's very, very cool. I highly recommend checking it out. But just to give you kind of the simple boilerplate analysis here, Brian O'Neill was a 9.6, Garrett Bradbury a 9.96, and Ezra Cleveland now a 9.93 in accordance with relative athleticism score. So there is a template there, and again, these numbers that he gets that he reaches ultimately, he comes to with all the combine stats. And like any time, literally any time an athlete does something athletic on the field, it's put into this number. Okay, I'm not a math guy. You guys know that. I don't know how to explain this statistically speaking. But ultimately, he's taking all this information and putting it down into one number, and all these guys seem to come out with about the exact same athleticism score. That tells me a couple of things. One, I've learned from Seattle, I believe, that they love Spark. And if you've heard of Spark before, it's a similar grading system that does athleticism and tries to gauge just a simple number out of a bunch of information, the same way that RAS does. Okay? Seattle has been picking offensive linemen that fit Spark scores for 6 or 7 years. And I think it was...
Seems like it's working out for him.
It does. Yeah, they seem to figure it out, okay? And I can't remember who it was on Twitter, but it was one of these Seattle guys. I think it's the dude that works for the Ringer now. I can't think of his... I'm sorry. I can't think of his name.
Ben Baldwin?
No. No, it's not him. I can't think of his name. I'll say it at some point. But anyways, he was literally predicting which offensive lineman Seattle was going to take in like rounds 4 through 7 for like 2 years in a row just based off of Spark scores. Okay? And so I'm seeing a similar trend now with the Vikings, and apparently Nick is as well, because he puts this information up and you look at it, and these three offensive linemen, arguably, Brian O'Neill is the most successful offensive lineman the Vikings have drafted since Matt Khalil, and Matt Khalil had 1 year of success, like Brian O'Neill.
If you want to call it successful, yeah.
Right. Okay. They found their template, like you said. They found the type of player that they're looking for, and they went out and got him, which I can respect. And all reports suggested this was going to happen. I think he's going to end up being a backup offensive tackle this year. I don't see them sliding Riley Reif into guard and starting Ezra Cleveland at tackle this year. I can't wrap my mind around that move after what happened with Mike Remmers. But if it does happen that way, I think the Vikings are in fairly safe hands, because I do think this is a high potential player, and the type of athleticism that he has, when you're running plays that require your offensive tackle to move out in front and get out in front of your running back.
Zone runs,
like, the entire scheme that the Vikings run, pretty much. You need to have a player of this caliber in terms of athleticism on your outside. So I love the Ezra Cleveland pick. I think it fits the system. I think it's great value. Again, first 3 picks for the Vikings to me, absolutely flawless.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right about the fact that he's probably going to sit at least to start 2020 now. Injuries will probably get him vault him into action, as it happened with Brian O'Neill in 2018. I'm sure we'll see him, but I'm not with these people on moving either Cleveland himself or Reif into guard. I think they're really going to stick with Elfline there, and then go Bradbury center, and then at right guard maybe have Drew Samia.
I think that's who it's going to be too.
Potentially. Yeah. But I think the offensive line definitely got better by drafting Ezra Cleveland, and for the long haul, there's the potential for sort of your bookends to be set there, assuming that this bridge will have to be crossed at some point. The extension for Brian O'Neill happens probably a year from now or so,
right,
to get him locked in long term. But yeah, I'm not giving it an A+. but because I would have liked Josh Jones there. But Cleveland, I understand it. There was interest there. There was rumors about him being a first-round pick. They got him late second. I like that.
For sure. And he gets an A- from CBS, if you care about that. So there's that.
I care a little bit about that,
yeah,
I suppose.
It's not bad. Moving forward here, this is kind of where it starts to get a little bit interesting. Now, this next player, Cameron Dantzler from Mississippi State, I don't dislike the player. I don't dislike the fit. I really don't have a problem with any of it, other than the fact that he's not a supreme prospect. He's more of a very good fit, and if he fills out, this could be a hell of a player for the Vikings.
It's like there's like a little bit of Trey Waynes where like he's thin,
right?
But then I think he's got like the physicality, like he plays aggressive, sort of like Rhodes a little bit early in his career. So it's like kind of a little bit of both of them to me. The lanky, long frame. This is more of the size type that Zimmer would like, right? And I saw the stat today that he locked down throws from Joe Burrow in 2019. Now it's a small sample size, right? Because that's just one game against LSU. But the passer rating was like 70, and he allowed like 13 yards or something like that. So that's it's the Vikings need cornerbacks, and they took 3 in the draft for a reason, because Mike Zimmer loves developing his corners. You had Mike Hughes, Holton Hill. That's about it at the cornerback position heading into the draft. So you got a couple guys that are going to have to contribute right away. I think Dantzler has at least some of the traits to contribute right away. We'll see if it translates, and if the frame is too much, if his frame is too thin, rather, to keep up with some of the bigger bodied receivers in the NFL. But that'll definitely be something to watch moving forward.
So Cameron Dantzler, I think that he's going to see some play this season. Like there's going to be opportunities for him, because the Vikings don't have much else. I mean, we all know that Holton Hill is going to find his way to get himself in trouble again, and someone's probably going to get hurt. So Cameron Dantzler is probably going to get forced into action at some point or another. My problem with this pick, the reason why it's not an A for me and why it's more of a B, is because I don't trust him to step in immediately, simply because this is a guy who needs to literally add 20 pounds. Okay? And 20 pounds of muscle at that, right? He's going to get pushed around by wide receivers who are bigger than him. I'm just imagining AJ Green trying to cover AJ Green in the league, and the reason why I'm thinking AJ Green is because he beat the shit out of Jalen Ramsey. So I can't see him doing well as a rookie. I think this is a great project pick. I think this is a guy that, like you said, fits the Zimmer mold to a T, so we can keep that narrative going into next year, right? Because he is 6'2". Lean, extreme, like ridiculously long arms. Tentacles is probably a better term. And he's physical. He fights, and of course he tackles, because Mike Zimmer doesn't draft any cornerback who doesn't tackle. Okay, so that's what you're getting out of this player. And when you're drafting him at 89th overall, that's a good pick, right? That's about where the Vikings selected Neal Hunter, a high upside player that's got all the measurables. I know I'm comparing apples and oranges in terms of positions, but when you're talking about the value and the potential, this is a good play for the Vikings. It's going to give them a player that's probably going to be somewhat of a factor this year, but just not an impact guy. I see him more as a guy who comes in for 5-10 snaps every once in a while because someone got hurt, someone got caught smoking, or someone sucks.
Oh, yeah. Well, and my goal going in, or my goal, I'm not a part of the team, so my goals don't matter. My wish was that the Vikings get 4 guys that can contribute right away to the needs that were all over the roster. And clearly the biggest ones: receiver, corner, offensive line. I think for sure 3 of them. I think both corners, you got Gladney, you have Dantzler. Those guys are going to contribute right away just because of the need for it. I think Justin Jefferson's going to be your immediate wide receiver 2, as long as Zimmer plays him. And then at offensive line, at the very very least, you have a solid depth and a great backup tackle option. If there's some sort of injury,
who might be better than your starter.
You might be, yes. Right. And if he's not, if you put 50 more pounds on him, and he probably is. Right. So, and the way the NFL draft is, like, for me personally, I didn't pay a ton of attention to the end of the draft, just because, like, it was too many 6th and 7th round picks to keep track of. Like, I know he ended up with 15 picks. I don't know a lot about these guys, but based on the first 4 picks, and that's a lot of what my grade is going to be, what I'm going to remember about this draft and how Spielman did. He addressed the needs. He got the best players that I think, were available at the time, and they were all great values. Jefferson probably fell a little bit farther than he should have. Gladney got him 6 picks lower than the Vikings could have grabbed him, and also got an extra pick out of it. Ezra Cleveland was potential first-round pick, got him late second. Dantzler, another guy, early third prospect potentially, late third-round pick. Vikings got him there. So I am very satisfied with those first 4 picks, the first 3 rounds essentially of the draft. I think, and Spielman, again, we can talk all day about the addiction to trading down. And, I think people were upset about, why did he trade up all these picks? He never traded up. He never went and got his guy. But, A, if his guy, in quotes, never fell to a certain spot, then why would he? Right. But then, B, he's already got 12 picks for next year. Between the likely comp picks, I think they're going to get 3, maybe a third-rounder for Waynes, and then later ones in the draft. But then they got 2 more. They traded, I think, a 6th this year for a 5th next year. No, they traded a 5th in 2020 to the Bears for a 4th next year from the Bears. And then they did the same thing with the Ravens, where they traded a 7th. They traded 2 7ths and got a 7th this year and a 5th in 2021. So he's just piling on the value there. With, when you have 20,000 picks, trading one to get future value is not the worst idea.
And it's definitely the right move so long as you have job security. And it seems like,
well, it sounds like he does. Yeah,
I mean, it seems like he's
you don't trade down if
right.
you're going to be done, in 4 months or 5. I guess it'd be at the end of the year or so. I think it's safe to assume Rick Spielman would be the general manager past 2020.
I would agree. All right, let's move forward here into this kind of. So, to me, this is like kind of a whole separate part of the draft, right? The first 4 picks are your money picks, I think is what Jordan Reed calls them, right? The players where, like you said, you're trying to get an impact player, you're trying to get significant value, and you're trying to get production immediately, okay? That's kind of what you're getting with Jefferson, Gladney, Cleveland, and Dantzler. Now, the next group here, to me, is the 3 4th-round picks and the first 5th-round pick. And these are your high potential, fit your kind of your template, guys that might see some play this year, have the potential to become starters as the year progresses, but not necessarily high impact, immediate value players. And I think the Vikings did well with this as well. So the first one here is defensive end DJ Wanham from South Carolina. And this one, of this next 4, honestly, is my least favorite.
Really? So I think people made the comparison to Neal Hunter.
And I hate that. I don't see it.
And, well,
I see Scott Crichton. I'm sorry, and I'm sorry that
I saw that you said that on Twitter,
Crichton.
and it's fine. I just think that there are a little bit more athletic some traits there than maybe Crichton would have than he showed. But it's the Vikings are trying to find that that rotational guy that becomes the starter, right? We've talked about that before. Where it was, Brian Robinson was the rotational guy for a long time behind Ray Edwards and Jared Allen. And then Robinson took the starting role. And then, it was Everson Griffin who was that rotational guy. And then Neal Hunter was the rotational guy. And then, it's been on and on and on. It's a cycle. And then that guy eventually becomes a solid starter for a long time. I think they're thinking this is going to be the guy. They tried this with Crichton. You're right. And that didn't work to your point. So I don't know. I think it could work out. I think it's at the very least some depth at the position that is needed because pass rushers are not there's not a ton of them on the roster right now with Fadi being
this is true. Yeah.
The starter now and no more with Stephen Weatherly. Now I will say one thing that people made a huge deal of today was that jersey numbers were announced for all the rookies, which is like 1,000 of them, and number 97 was not
right
presented to anybody. Everson Griffin still not signed with the team. That door might be open just a little bit. But again, this is about DJ Wanham and the fact that I know very little about him, and I'm still staggering on about him trying to sound like an expert.
Let's go through some objective numbers here. We'll talk since this is a potential play. Let's go percentiles. This is coming straight from Mock Draftable. So Wanham is going to fit into. He's got a nice looking spider chart. I know that this is great for audio, but so he's in the 84th percentile for height, but he's also in the 13th percentile for weight. So take what you want from that. To me, that's kind of a wash, right? He's got to add some weight. There's nothing you can. I mean, the height is good, but he's got to add some. He's got to add some weight. The big thing, and I think the reason why people keep comparing him to Neal Hunter is the arm size, or the arm length, excuse me. 76th percentile for that. Hand size is 88th percentile. 48-yard dash is 86th percentile. Vertical jump and broad jump are 81 and 93 percentile respectively. That is a measure of your explosion off the line, generally speaking. So he scores very high in all of those numbers, which leads you to believe that with a little bit of coaching, and I know that all of us trust the defensive line coach and Mike Zimmer, and we believe in Patterson to get this guy kind of to the next level. But I don't think he's a starter. I think he's a nice piece, and I think he's going to play next year. So those in the, what was this? This was the fourth round, top of the fourth round, basically. You like that pick. It's a good selection. I just wish it was a different defensive end, because this isn't the one that I liked. I liked the Alabama kid. I liked the LSU kid that we picked, 3 different times in our mock drafts. This just wasn't my personal pick. And really, again, like you said before, my opinion doesn't mean anything. What I want, my goals for this organization mean nothing. But from what I see from this kid, and I have watched so much less film of him than everyone in the Vikings organization that I shouldn't even be allowed to be able to talk about him. But I just don't see the high potential like I saw with Neal Hunter. To me, despite the low sack totals, he popped, right? You could see the finesse. You could see the agility. You could see the traits. And we all said that. We just said, if this guy can be refined, he could be a really good player. We didn't think he could be that good, as good as he is now. But we saw, okay, this guy has potential. Just give him some refinement, and he's going to be a great player. I don't see that with Wanham. I just don't. And I'm sorry. There's probably another podcast out there that does. Listen to that one on DJ Wanham. Okay? The next pick here is James Lynch from Baylor. For the record, Wanham got a C- from CBS, if you're keeping score. James Lynch also got a C- from CBS. I'm not a fan of that grade. I think this is a good pick. You get a big defensive tackle, a 3 technique specifically. You really need one. You need someone to push Jaleel Johnson heading into this year. I think you get that with your 4th-round pick here.
Yeah, you do. You do. And I was seeing some stuff on Twitter, and they were saying he's got this attitude about him, the feist, the aggressiveness and the nastiness of J.J. Watt, which is I think what that was is here's a white interior defensive lineman. Yeah, I'm going to compare him to the first white interior defensive lineman I can think of. But James Lynch, it's exactly what it's just filling a positional need, filling the scheme fit more than anything, and kind of the top guy at that spot in the draft that does that for you. And I think James Lynch was that. Gives competition where it's needed. I still think that spot on the roster is a big problem right now, 3 tech. So hopefully he or Jaleel Johnson or somebody there can kind of step up. Armin Watts can step up and sort of solidify that spot for themselves and be a good performer.
So to go back to mock draftable here, again, trying to provide something objective. It's not good. It doesn't look good for for James Lynch. He does not have a good spider chart. So if you place any value in his athleticism relative to his peers, James Lynch is not the pick for you. But I do think that those personality traits that you just mentioned, the production at Baylor, this kind of the ability to move from 3 to 5, and probably to 1 as well, honestly, in some situations. That type of interior versatility is something the Vikings desperately need right now. You get that with this pick. Again, it's a solid pick. It's not a home run. It's not a steal. He didn't fall. I mean, there's people who don't even know who this guy is, but he fills your need. He fills your need. He gives you somewhat of a solution to the problem that you have, and he's gonna come in and compete. You don't have to worry about his personality. That's a quality 4th-round pick. So, to me, another positive grade. Not a great pick, but fine. It works, okay? The next one here is where it starts to get fun again to me. The linebacker Troy Dye from Oregon, okay? This has the potential to be one of my favorite picks in the entire draft. And going into this situation, I didn't know who Troy Dye was, but I spent some time watching video on him, and he was the one guy in this draft who I actually I sat down and I continued to watch. I needed to see more and more because there's so many different things about this player that if he can answer little question marks regarding athleticism and where he played in terms of his defense and the scheme that he played in and how he transitions to the NFL, this guy has so many great intangible skills in terms of knowing where to be on the field, being a leader, understanding his gap assignments, just being in the right place at the right time, solid coverage skills, all of these little factors. I mean, I'm saying all of these things, and don't you hear Eric Kendricks? Like, that's the type of style of play that the Vikings are looking for from their weak side linebacker, and honestly, their middle linebacker as well.
Yeah, and I think it's weird that I think you compare him to, compare in the sense that he's got the play style of Kendricks, where he's got has a little bit of that coverage stuff. He's got the range and speed right across the field, but he did a lot of pass rushing as well at Oregon, which in a way is similar to the way Anthony Barr came out as a rookie in 2014, where he was doing a lot of pass rushing, and then the Vikings drafted him to be a 4-3 outside linebacker. And Barr has not done a ton of pass rushing in the NFL, and that's probably the situation Troy Dye finds himself in now. And so it's going to be a lot of that coverage stuff that you mentioned, and that's going to be the transition for him, is less pass rushing, more of the Kendricks and Barr do for the Vikings. So I do like it, though. Very athletic. Like you said, the leadership there has sort of been the rock of the Oregon defense. So I like that. I like that a lot, and I think it's a solid add. And again, that linebacker spot next to Barr and Kendricks is absolutely wide open right now. Whether it's Wilson or Gideon or whoever else,
he could start.
That's a spot that he could take for himself this year.
I'm not going to be surprised by it. In fact, if I was doing a depth chart right now, I would put him above Gideon. And granted, Gideon's not on the field for more than 40% of the snaps about.
That's whoever wins the spot is right. That third linebacker spot that's going to be the case for that person. But
so one of the things that I do like about Dye here, and I think is worth exploring as we get closer to the season, in terms of once we see how he meshes with this team and how pro ready he is this could give you some versatility with the way you play Anthony Barr. You just mentioned the fact that Barr hasn't been used as much of a pass rusher. He's paid as a pass rusher, folks. We thought it was coming last year. We thought he was going to start, put his hand into the dirt and come off the edge. But with Everson Griffin gone now, and Ifeadi Odenigbo said it, I just said that name so well, by the way, set to start. I mean, Anthony Barr makes sense to have him, take snaps from that probably would be the right defensive end position, just because, why would you move to Neal Hunter from the left spot, I guess? I don't know. I like the fit because I think that Dye can slide in and play linebacker at a high level. And I'm talking pure 2005 linebacker, where you're covering running backs out of the backfield, you're hitting the hole hard, you're racking up tackles at a very high rate, straight up Brandon Spikes linebacker, can't do anything else. He can do that super well. Stay-at-home linebacker. He can be that guy for the Vikings, okay? And that gives the opportunity for Anthony Barr to expand his game. And I think that honestly is worth more to the Vikings than Dye himself, because Anthony Barr has limitless potential that really hasn't even been explored. I mean, let's just be honest with ourselves. Mike Zimmer's a great defensive guru. He puts so many guys in great positions, but Anthony Barr is a guy who has kind of gotten a raw deal because they put him in a position where the Vikings need him to be. They don't have an answer with someone else. You can't put Ben Gideon where Anthony Barr is. You can put Troy Dye there. That's why I think this pick is so valuable, and that's why I like it so much
I like that perspective. I didn't even think of that, but maybe the fact that the Vikings do have a lack of pass rushers now at defensive end could push Barr into that role. I never even considered that, but it's a good point. They've teased the idea before. A lot of it in preseason, you'd see it in a game. You're like, oh my God, here's the year. The only Anthony Barr, they're going to throw him off the edge and rush him to the passer all the time. But it hasn't quite happened yet. Maybe this lack of pass rushing depth plus the addition of Troy Dye, maybe that'll be what puts him over the top.
So Dye, by the way, just so you don't have to look it up yourself, racked up over 100 tackles twice at Oregon. over 10 tackles for loss twice at Oregon, and he had a sack every single year and an interception every single year. So the versatility actually shows up in his stats somehow. So he gets an A from CBS. He definitely gets an A from me in this draft position. I've also read from people a lot smarter than me that he fell a lot in this draft, and he could have easily been a second or third round selection as well. So take that for what it's worth. Take those opinions for with a grain of salt, I suppose. But I think this is a great addition, and that moves us on to our next player here. That's Harrison Hand out of Temple. Again, a guy I don't know very much about. This is a guy honest to God, I have to defer to the quote expert analysis on this player. But I think this is another good fit. And I think this is another good value based off of what I have read about this player.
Another good tackler, which shocking that Mike Zimmer would select a good tackler at cornerback. But he's 5'11", 200 pounds, so he's got a thicker frame than someone like Cameron Dantzler, who's like 120 pounds. But is it's going to be competition for someone like Chris Boyd, right?
For sure.
In camp. So I think right now this is sort of a depth spot there, and hopefully can develop into something more than that. But Harrison Hand, it looks like he will be physical at the line as well. I think there's a lot of technical issues outside of that could probably be improved, but good tackler, physical, competitive, and good run support all seem to check those boxes. So, a lot of work for Zimmer to do there probably, but again, he and Chris Boyd probably will be competing for the fifth spot, I suppose, on that cornerback depth chart if you put Holton Hill above them.
I think that's probably a fair kind of assessment, given that we don't know a whole lot about this player, and unfortunately he's going to get the COVID offseason. So he's not even going to really have the opportunity to compete a whole lot. He's going to have to kind of go off of his pedigree, which, by the way, if there is a knock on this draft, this is the wrong year to select 15 players. Just by the way. I know that this is the Vikings podcast, and I'm supposed to, shove sunshines and daisies up your ass, but in this situation, like 15 picks, I just don't know if I agree with...
I never thought of that either. But
it just came into my head now.
They don't get an offseason to...
right.
Learn more about. Have they met these? So many of these guys they haven't even met in person before, and they won't be able to.
That's what I'm saying. So, that's kind of not great. But let's try to focus on the positive here. Okay, so Harrison Hand, kind of going off of my knowledge of what general managers try to do. Right. Okay. So generally speaking, when you draft a player, you want to draft a player who has one or two tools and then has a third tool that you can develop, right? I think we've heard that before. I think that was probably in draft day. So your dad probably knows that as well. So that's not insider knowledge by any means. But when you look at kind of the way that this guy's athleticism scores stack up against his, peers, I suppose, there's nothing you can do about his height. He's going to be 5'11". That's just who he is, okay? He's 200 pounds. He can add a little bit of muscle there. That might change a little bit. The things that really, really stand out here are his broad jump and his vertical jump, so explosion scores, okay? 133-inch broad jump, that's 96th percentile. 41-inch vertical jump, that's 95th percentile. So this kid, who's literally coming out of nowhere, by the way, coming from Temple, has very, very strong traits in areas that you need to have in terms of being a cornerback. You want to know that your guy can turn around and just blow by dudes. He's got that explosion off, kind of his step, his plant foot, I suppose, right? He also has the ability to jump up and make the fact that he's 5'11", he can erase that from the sheet because he can jump 41 inches. So, if he's covering someone who's 6'3", chances are very, very good that he can make up those 4 inches with his vertical jump. So you look at those couple things. You look at kind of the ability, the fact that he's played a lot of football. There's room for him to improve. Is basically the point that I'm ramping up to. And again, we're in the 4th round at this point. We're in the 5th round at this point. You don't need to get a guy who's going to start. You want to have a guy that has potential, and I think Harrison Hand has that. So, this is taking a lot longer than I thought it was going to get through all these picks. All right, so moving on in the 5th round here. This is kind of the 5th, the KJ Osborne pick, moving all the way to the bottom in the Kyle Hinton pick. This is kind of your third phase of the draft, right? When we were doing our picks with our simulation, we talked a lot about getting guys who are special teams players, high leadership, character players, guys who fit well with sort of that mold that the Vikings like to bring in. And this is a bit of a mixed bag here. Let's start with KJ Osborne out of Miami. I think it's pretty clear that he's not being drafted to play wide receiver, that this is kind of a Marcus Sherrill's fill.
Yeah, right, exactly. Punt returner, and the fact that Mike Hughes has been that guy, but you would anticipate that his role will increase at cornerback, so they get this guy Osborne. He is a receiver. He played slot at Miami and at Buffalo as a slot guy and has some yard after catch ability, but I think he was like 50-something, the number 50-something receiver on McShay's big board. Like, in terms of just as a receiver, probably not worth drafting, if we're being honest. But if he turns into a decent punt returner, then that's probably worth a late flyer on, I suppose. So, not a name that a lot of people even considered or looked at. So you're kind of taking a shot here on his punt return abilities for the Vikings, and I guess we'll see how it pans out. But they do need to address that position now that Mike Hughes won't be that guy just because he'll be playing corner all the time.
There isn't. Honestly, this is one of my least favorite picks in the entire class. Just because, you guys have heard me say this before about kickers. If I don't believe in drafting kickers, I definitely don't believe in drafting punt returners. And I definitely,
at least it's a punt returner and not a kick returner, because kick returns are being eliminated from the game. So
I suppose. Okay, so positives, right? His athleticism traits, his spider chart matches up at an 87% clip with Golden Tate. How about that? That's positive, right? If he turned into Golden Tate, that seems like a win to me. Other than that, though, honestly, I don't like this pick. I see a lot of Stacey Coley again, and I know it's partially because he's from, a special teams guy from Miami. But I'm seeing Stacey Coley all over again, and we already know how that story ended. So I'm not a huge fan of this pick. It's got a C+ from CBS. It gets probably less than that for me, honestly. The next one here is Blake Brandel from Oregon State. I don't know. I know very, very little about this guy. Straight up, this guy came out of nowhere to me. Oregon State is not in my peripherals in terms of college football watching. I don't know. I don't
6'7", 308, has played both left and right tackle. Vikings getting their versatile lineman that can play at any position. That's basically what this is.
And honestly, yeah, that's kind of what I see as well. I don't have anything more fun to add, and I'm not going to blow smoke up your ass either. I think I've probably sworn more in this episode than I have in the last 15. Moving on here, I'm just going to keep going because we're running out of time and I don't have anything fun to add about Brandel. So Josh Metellus from Michigan. This is a player who I actually know who he is. I watched him play at Michigan. I know what the Vikings are getting here, and it's an unathletic safety that's probably not going to make the team. He looks really, really cool doing it, though. He's got phenomenal hair. And he's a team leader. He's straight up. I know that Jordan Reed doesn't like him either. That definitely plays into my opinion for sure. But to me, this is not a great pick. But it's going to give you a special teams player, which again, that's what we like to do.
As long as Harris and Smith are still at safety, they're still starting, and they stay relatively healthy. That's a lot of ifs. And I'm knocking on wood right now, but. Safety won't be a position that's needed, and at the very most, this can just be a depth draft pick. But that'll be something I'll watch, is whether this guy can make the team, because it's not unheard of for 4th, 5th, 6th round picks, 7th round picks, obviously, to just not make the roster, especially when you have 1,000 of them.
I think the same analysis that we just gave to Mr. Metellus here sort of also applies to defensive end Kenny Willekes from Michigan State. This is another guy, defensive end. This is a depth add for the Vikings at a position where they just don't have that many defensive ends right now, just like they don't have that many safeties. You can apply the exact same practice here. He's 6'3", 264, 31 1/4 inch arms, 9.5 inch hands. He's not blowing anyone away with his combine numbers. He's not really blowing anyone away with really anything, to be honest.
I will say the production in terms of just a cumulative number of sacks, tackles for loss, all of that stuff, he was pretty darn good at, and putting up those type of numbers while at Michigan State. Now, you can say what you want about cumulative numbers and the fact that he's playing in the Big Ten and all that is different. But I think the production would suggest that he's a much higher value than 7th round pick. So from that perspective, I like it. Again, the athleticism, like you're saying, not awesome, but this is the type of at the very least you're going to get a guy I think that will be sort of a grinder on special teams if you need him to be. So I think the Vikings are doing themselves a service in that aspect, and then if he can come around and play, contribute as a pass rusher, then so be it.
So to me he's interesting because he used to be a linebacker. So that's kind of fun, right? You get a little bit of versatility there. But my overarching issue with this is I think he's more of a 3-4 defensive end. So based off of his size and his strengths, I don't know how well his game translates to going one-on-one off the edge as a pure pass rusher from the defensive end spot. His numbers suggest that he's great at setting the edge. The tackle for loss numbers that you just brought up are, frankly, they're outstanding over the last 3 years. 15.5, 20.5, 13 over the last 3 years.
Yeah.
That's outstanding.
The production and those numbers, and he's got some good sack numbers too. I think 10 or 10.5 last year,
right.
Something like that. And a bunch of tackles for a lot. Like those are superb, right?
Right.
It's just that, I think in the Big Ten, you can get away with not being as athletic. Maybe, if you compare, if you put him in the SEC, those numbers aren't going to be the same, right? And then especially in the NFL, obviously it's going to be a completely different game. So that's the concern I think for him. But I think he's got that grinder mentality. He's come back from a broken leg before. He's got that on his side. So. That'll be fun to watch because I think he can be a special teams ace. Kind of like, remember Heath Farwell back in the day?
Oh, yeah.
Like I think he can kind of be that type of guy.
And I'd be fine with that in the 7th round. I would love that in the 7th round. It'd be a great pick.
Exactly.
Just for your reference, the last 3 guys, I don't believe I mentioned their grades. CBS gave a D+ to Brandel, a C to Metellus, and they actually gave an A- to Mr. Willikis here. Am I pronouncing that right? I don't even know.
Willikis sounds right.
I'll figure it out if he makes the roster. How about that? Last 3 picks here. Nate Stanley of Iowa, the quarterback, 244th overall. Straight up, don't have a problem with drafting a quarterback because I like the idea of anyone pushing Sean Mannion, but I'll take Jake Browning over Nate Stanley any day of the week. Straight up. I don't think this guy makes the roster. I think this is kind of like I just don't see this one going anywhere. He's undersized. Doesn't have a great arm. He doesn't make great decisions. He's an Iowa quarterback, for God's sake. Like, they don't throw the ball that effectively there, period. I just don't I don't have a problem with these selections late in the game because it's lottery tickets, right? You're trying to get as many prospects as you can, evaluate as many as possible, and then you try to make decisions from there based off your experience and your talent on your coaching staff. So I'm okay with the selection. But I take so many other quarterbacks over Nate Stanley, and they had so many
Anthony
opportunities.
Gordon was not picked, so they picked him over Anthony Gordon for one. I know that.
I don't love that. I mean, Anthony Gordon at least has, incredible zip on his fastball. Nate Stanley does not have even that. He's a good decision maker.
Stanley's not mobile.
Sees the field well. I mean, I don't
know. Never completed more than 60% passes in a season at Iowa. Like you said, drafting quarterback's never a bad idea. Unless you're the Packers, you trade up 4 spots to draft Aaron Rodgers back.
I had to slip it in there somewhere.
Had to get that in there at some point, but it's fine. I'm with you. I don't anticipate him making the roster right now, but we'll see.
And just to be fair here, when you draft 15 guys, I mean, probably 7 of them aren't going to make the roster. It's just inherently, right? If not more. I mean, the practice squad's going to be loaded, but this is not
the
a
best practice squad in the league, man.
Seriously, though. Yeah, straight up. But 53-man roster, I don't think it's got Nate Stanley's name on it. I hope he proves me wrong because I hate Sean Mannion, and you guys know that. So let's move forward. He gets a C from CBS. Safety Brian Cole from Mississippi State is the next one on your board. Okay, not necessarily an athletic specimen, but some of the things that I really, really like from Brian Cole specifically. Incredible leadership qualities. I know that you guys are tired of hearing about that, but that type of thing, Like, that translates well to the NFL because it means that he can handle the grind. It means that he'll be in the weight room when he needs to be in the weight room. It means that he's going to be learning the playbook and that he's going to be helping people that don't understand the playbook. Those types of things are good. You want to have that, and if you're going to take a flyer on someone in the 7th round, you take those intangible traits all day long. And he comes from Mississippi State as well, an SEC program. He played against pro-caliber players the entire career.
Played with Cameron Dantzler.
He did that too. So there's a lot of good things, a lot of things to like about this player. It's just, again, when you get this deep in the draft, you're probably not getting a starter. But you might have a special team stud here, and you might have a good role player depending on what happens at safety.
Yeah, I mean, he ran a 4.5 240. He played a little bit like the Tyrann Mathieu role at Mississippi State, where like he would play like that linebacker hybrid safety, like, you know, all over the field type of thing. So that could be fun in the long run if he turns out. I like this as safety depth a little bit more than Metellus, but
I do too. Honestly, I think he's got a better shot too to make the team.
Yeah, I think so too. That's fine with me. You know, I don't know a ton about Brian Cole, but the little I know and a little bit I've read, I think that's a little bit better for depth than Metellus. But you know, again, we're just a couple of dudes with laptops, and it's April 28th. So,
just for your reference here, Brian Cole is only a 1-year starter at Mississippi State, and he actually transferred from Josh Metellus' Michigan. So.
Oh.
Maybe do you think that there's probably a rivalry there to some degree? I imagine.
I like it though. You know,
I do. That's
the
good.
Competition a little bit. Yeah. Take up the heat a little bit in training camp. That'll be fun.
So what makes this kind of fun here? He is a versatile safety as well. He's a box safety and also a guy who can line up and go get it in coverage as well. So that's Brian Cole for you. He gets a B+ grade from CBS. And the final pick of this draft for the Minnesota Vikings is offensive lineman out of Washburn, Kyle Hinton. And so for me, this just, again, this is another player like Brandel who has a lot of versatility on a bunch of different offensive line positions, specifically the interior, I believe, what makes a little bit more sense for him in the pros.
Right. Well, he's 6'2", not even 300 pounds. You can't play tackle at that size.
So he's going to be a guard
he's gonna be,
or a center.
He's going to have to be inside. He's going to have to gain weight too. But yeah, just another project that might turn into something. Probably won't, but we'll root for him to turn into something. Probably as a guard or maybe even a center in the NFL.
Absolutely. And given the kind of the situation the Vikings have at guard right now, I mean, Drew Samia and Pat Elflein are your starters as it stands today, right? I'm cool with drafting a little bit of versatility there. Okay. So overall, that is your full analysis of, well, not full analysis, but that was pretty quality analysis and some fun, right? For 15 picks. Overall, how did the Vikings do in this draft? What is your final takeaway?
They did really well. I think they definitely addressed needs that needed to be addressed. Took some flyers on guys that were worth taking a flyer on in the later rounds, I think. And then, I think there may have been missed opportunities in terms of trading up for like a CeeDee Lamb or Jerry Jeudy when they started to fall. And then again, I like Josh Jones at tackle instead of Cleveland there in the second round. But, it's mostly nitpicking at that point. So, and I like the more I think about your point about the fact that you're drafting 15 picks in this offseason where you're not going to be able to see these guys. And a lot of these, they haven't even met face to face before with a lot of these players. So, if I'm gonna give a grade, it's gonna be like an A-, and I think a lot of it's just because of the fact that he kept trading down, did not trade up, did not go get his guy, or was not. I think he was aggressive, but he didn't get that trade done to move up. There was rumors about the whole week, but you get 15 picks. They had 17. They got value coming into next year as well. Overall, needs were addressed. The team's a lot better now than it was a week ago.
I would definitely agree with that. I'm going to give it an A- as well, just overall. And really, it's for the same reasons that you just said. You got your 2, 3, 4 potential starters. You got 2, 3, 4 potential special teams players, and somewhere in between, you got a bunch of guys who are boom or bust type draft picks. Guys where they have very high potential and very, very low floors. Mm-hmm. And that's what you want when you're drafting 15 players. If you draft 15 guys, chances are 3 or 4 are going to work out well.
Yeah.
And that's on the low end of that spectrum, right?
And working out well, for what it's worth, means like serviceable starter for like a year or two or multiple years, right? Like we're not talking like 2015 when Kendricks and Stephon Diggs and Neal Hunter all turned out to be superstars. That's unprecedented. But the Vikings are able to get 1 or 2 Pro Bowl caliber players out of this draft. That'd be sweet. And then you get a bunch of guys that can contribute as starters. That would be ideal. So
absolutely. And they also
overall it's pretty solid to me.
For what it's worth, too, they also picked up a couple guys that I like in undrafted free agency. Courtney Davis,
yeah, that's a big name.
Wide receiver from Texas A&M. He gets $100,000 guaranteed, which is that's pretty cool. Just by the way.
I think I saw there was, I can't remember who it was, but somebody was saying something about how the system's interesting because there's a bidding war that starts for these undrafted free agents, and these guys end up getting more money guaranteed than they would if they were drafted, which is, I suppose that's the way it works in the bidding war, Right.
But overall, yeah, this is a great draft for the Vikings. They did everything that they set out to do. When we were doing our simulations and we said these are our parameters, this is what we want, the Vikings did everything that I wanted them to do as a fan, as a half-ass analyst, whatever I am. They did everything that you could have asked for. Straight up. Like, what more could you have wanted other than to mortgage the future by trading up? I know some of you are screaming Tyler Johnson right now, and I don't care. I just don't care. I don't care. I like Tyler Johnson. I like the U of M, but I'm not married to the Golden Gophers, and I just don't care. I hope he has a great career in Tampa Bay. I would have liked to see him in purple and gold. But straight up, like he's not – like some of you thought he was going to be a first-round pick. Like, give me a break. Let's just come on. It's – it would have been nice to see them pick him over KJ Osborne, for sure.
Or move up once because they had 25 seventh rounders.
Or just not move back.
Yeah. But yeah, that would have been sweet. But that's more of the fanfare. That's just it's always wishful thinking, right? Like I had the same thing with Ben Bartch, right?
It would have been awesome, yeah.
It would have been sweet, and then he was sniped right before the Vikings had their 17th pick, I believe. Jaguars took him one pick before. Now, were they going to pick Ben Bartch, the Vikings? Probably not. But it's fun to think about that there's 32 teams in the league. You got a 1 in 32 chance of Tyler Johnson being picked by the Vikings.
And apparently you've got a 100% chance of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers drafting every Gopher that matters. So, just another reason to watch Tampa Bay.
The Packers drafted a Gopher that didn't matter.
Did they? Shocker.
That the linebacker, Qual Martin, I think his name, or Camille, but something like that.
Something.
I don't know.
It doesn't matter what the Packers
I just know it didn't get great reviews. Their entire draft didn't get great reviews, and I want to keep saying that because it's funny.
Should we spend a couple minutes here just blowing up the Packers? Because this is
I want to roast Packers, and then I want to roast the Bears for drafting another tight end because they literally have 10 now. That's not a joke. It's not an exaggeration. They have 10 tight ends on their roster.
So let's do that.
Tight ends cannot hang out and follow social distancing together.
They couldn't all be in a nice. I like that. Let's do a little overtime then here. Get a little bit more than 60 minutes. Let's talk about the Packers draft real quick. Jordan Love, the quarterback, comes off the board first, and it's running back A.J. Dillon, tight end Josiah DeGuara from Cincinnati, linebacker Kamal Martin, offensive lineman John Runyon, center Jake Hansen, offensive tackle Simon Spetniak, safety Vernon Scott, and edge rusher Jonathan Garvin. That's your class for the Packers. This is the worst draft class I've ever seen.
It's not even about the players.
It doesn't make any sense.
It's just about the Green Bay Packers receivers, besides Devontae Adams. None of them should be on a roster, right? They're all practice squad caliber players. And the Packers enter the draft here with, this draft is the best wide receiver class maybe ever. And
it is.
I don't know how much Packer media, Packers bloggers, the whatever Twitter sphere if you follow, but every mock draft I saw from a Packers person had 1, 2, maybe 3 receivers picked in this draft.
And there was a couple of them who did the joke where they exaggerated it out and drafted 19
every time.
Right.
Yeah, it's this is what the Packers need to do. Ha ha ha. But I'm not that I'm kind of joking here. They
but
might
like also
actually
serious. Yeah.
And
Right.
they drafted zero receivers in this draft. Talent all over the place in this draft class. Tyler Johnson would have been their immediate number 2 option. They drafted none. Instead, they drafted a backup quarterback for Aaron Rodgers, who has been adamant about the fact that he wants to play in Green Bay for 5 more years. So that's a pick that, if all things go well in Green Bay, will be completely irrelevant. Mm-hmm. Then they have a running back who is a poor man's Derrick Henry, who is tall, big, strong.
For what it's worth, A.J. Dillon, talented
he's a strong
player.
Runner. Very
Good
strong
player.
Runner. Absolutely. Not a lot of value in the passing game. Plus, you have a stud in Aaron Jones. You have Jamal Williams, who already played way too much and took way too much of Aaron Jones' snaps. Now you get a third running back. What's the fit there? No idea. Then this tight end that they draft out of, I think, Cincinnati. I'm not going to say his name. Josiah something.
Yeah.
They said they wanted to use him like Kyle Juszczyk. They wanted to use him as a fullback. So for Aaron Rodgers, they drafted him his backup. They got him some competition. They drafted a running back who does not do anything in the pass game. In the second round, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And then they drafted a tight end who is going to be a fullback for them. That is the weapons that they added for Aaron Rodgers. Meanwhile, he's going to be throwing to Geronimo Allison and Marquise Valdez-Scantling. And I couldn't even tell you who their tight end is right now. Is it Mercedes Lewis? Is he their number 1? He can't be their number 1. There's somebody else there. But so yeah,
Jimmy
and
Graham
Mercedes Lewis is the only first round pick Aaron Rodgers has ever thrown a touchdown to. Mercedes Lewis. He's thrown it one time to Mercedes Lewis. No other first-round picks. That receiving class, the Packers should not have been 13-3 last year. Everybody knows that. I think they know it because they're drafting for the future. They're drafting their quarterback.
That's the only reasonable explanation for this, right? They know it. They know they're not that good.
They know they're not that good. That's the only explanation for this. And they're planning for when Rodgers is done. They are preparing themselves to stay competitive when Rodgers is done. They're not even trying to win with Rodgers anymore. They're just not. That's the only explanation for this.
I would be furious if I was a Packers fan. Just
and the best
absolutely.
Part, I know a couple Packers fans. I know, I've been interacting with like Zach Jacobson on Twitter. Love that guy, right? And it's the mental gymnastics they're going through to talk themselves
Pete
into
Bukowski
this.
on Twitter. If you follow Pete Bukowski, he is a great hate follow if you're a Vikings fan, by the way.
It's like the mental gymnastics to go through to convince themselves that this is the right plan, that the Packers have this plan where they're going to go back to old school football with A.J. Dillon. They're going to run the ball. They got their quarterback set for the future for the next 20 years. This is going to be the next Rodgers, where they have that perfect transition. And maybe that does work out. But this is so much different than what it was in 2005 when, Favre was going to retire at any moment.
Right.
And Rodgers was the number 1 prospect, and he fell to 24.
Right.
Jordan Love was a second-round prospect. And he had an atrocious 2019 season, and they drafted him in the first round. They traded up against nobody, right? They heard rumors the Colts were going to trade up, and the Colts didn't call the Dolphins. The Packers bid against themselves, and they won. The only thing they won the whole weekend was bidding against themselves for Jordan Love. It's great. I'm glad we got to talk about that. That's all I wanted to get off my chest.
Oh, that was great. That was worth sticking around for overtime. That was very fun.
I'm very happy about what the Packers did this weekend.
I want to hear.
I'm not going to stop posting them.
I want to hear someone justify it without sadness in their voice. I just don't. It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't like any of. I like A.J. Dillon as a prospect. I never would like him in the second round.
Admit the Packers fans that I know are they're sad, but they're disappointed. Right? They keep saying they're disappointed. They're sad. They wouldn't. That's not what they would do. But they're like, we'll see how it goes. Quarterback's never a bad position to draft, and I agree with that.
Yeah.
And this A.J. Dillon guy, very productive in college. So, but it's just there's just so many other needs that they could have addressed with the first 3 picks, specifically in that draft. And instead, they chose to pick a backup quarterback who, in the ideal world, won't even play for the Packers because their better guy will play for 5 more years. Running back who can't contribute in the passing game, and they already have 2 guys probably better than him, and a fullback. So. I don't understand. I don't get it.
When the Lions are definitively drafting better than you, there's no contest.
Wasn't even close.
The Lions are the only team in this division that gave even the Vikings a run for their money, and it's only because they got the best cornerback prospect. Period.
The Lions to win the North in 2020, 2021 is not a bad bet right now.
No, it's not.
You got 10-1. You got whatever the future is. Like, it's not a bad bet. The Packers are going to they're going to fall back to 500 or so. The Bears are still the Bears, and they don't need 50,000 tight ends.
No, they don't.
Are the Vikings going to win 10 games? Maybe not. I mean, the Lions might be a sneaky pick there. They drafted well. They addressed needs. Even they got rid of Darius Slay, they immediately filled a guy that might be better than him, Jeff and Okudah. So,
and they got Jay Sean Cornell from my high school, by the way. He ended up getting drafted. I was excited about that. That was nice to see. So, there's your quick analysis of the rest of the NFC North. I mean, just straight up, like, I know that this is a Vikings fan podcast, and I know that even, like, regardless of how hard Drew and I try to be 100% objective about everything we say, there's going to be some bias in there, especially towards a team like the Packers, who you just inherently, not necessarily dislike, but you're inherently rooting against. But straight up, like, there's no justification for any of this. There isn't. Like, I can look at the Lions draft, and it makes sense. I don't like that they drafted a running back at 35, but at least they drafted DeAndre Swift. You know, like, they drafted the best running back in the class, you know? And I just don't... It's...
Like, I want to say, well, the Lions drafted a running back in the second round, so that's not great. But the Packers did the same thing, and they drafted a guy that can't do anything in the pass game. And, yeah, you could look around everywhere in NFL media, and you look at all the draft grades. You know, every single website's done it, right? Every single website you can think of, even the ones that get 4 clicks, you get your draft grades on there.
Right.
And every single one has the Packers 32nd ranked in the league. I think I can't remember who I follow or who I saw on Twitter from, but basically he compiled and averaged the rankings of like 15 experts, put them in and gave like the GPA of every team.
Right.
And I think it was the Packers were 32nd with a 1.3 GPA, and I think it was like the next worst was like 2.18 or something.
Right.
So like it's not like they're definitively the worst draft class, and it's like you know, not even close to the 31st ranked draft class. So, and people are going to say, well, draft grades don't matter, this and that, and that's true. I mean, you know, what we say now does not matter in 5 months. It doesn't matter in 2 years. But from what we know about what positions matter, what the Packers needed, you know, the fact that running backs are slowly becoming like more replaceable.
Right.
Fullbacks are not a thing anymore. We know Aaron Rodgers wants to play 5 more years. Those first 3 picks make absolutely no sense to me.
Period. And that's I think that's a great place to leave off here. So thank you for listening to this marathon of a show. Appreciate that as always. I know that Climbing the Pocket, our squad there, they're producing a ton of post-draft content, so make sure to check out the website there.
Check out their YouTube too. They're doing a lot of YouTube stuff.
Yes.
Hit that up.
For sure. Check out the YouTube, and check us out on YouTube as well if you prefer to watch as opposed to listen. Just an idea. You can subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify as well, Megaphone. I don't know. Where do you listen to your podcast? Just tell me where you listen to your podcast, and so I can tell you where we are located. How about that? You can find us on Daily Norseman as always. Leave a comment in the comment section on what you thought about the draft. I love reading those. And next week, we will shift our focus here to the rest of the NFL offseason as it pertains to your Minnesota Vikings. So we'll see how that goes. But, yeah, great draft for the Vikings. Really enjoyable show to do. And we will catch you guys next week.